I already take care of everything and everyone. How much more should I do? Said Helen resentfully. But her husband didn't say anything back. Paul, as usual, preferred to hide his head in the sand in the hope that everything would work itself out somehow. But the truth was that usually everything did not work out by itself. It was Helen who sorted out the problems. The woman had been working remotely from home for several years, so she had a free schedule. Her salary was not much at first, but then Helen upgraded her skills, and she started getting much more than her husband. Her money was used to pay the car loan, travels, appliances, and clothing. When Helen became pregnant, she practically did not reduce her workload so as not to lose a good income. The baby boy was born, and it became more difficult for Helen to work, but she coped with it even so. And when he grew up and was able to go to kindergarten, Helen began to work even harder. After all, now she had to pay for the best kindergarten, which she had chosen with great responsibility. Her husband, as always, trusted his wife in these and many other matters. All this time they lived in an apartment which Helen had inherited from her grandmother. Paul had no place of his own. Before they got married, he had been living with his mother and his older sister's daughter. The sister passed away 5 years ago, and it broke Paul's mother's heart. Mrs. Clark's health became worse. Her blood pressure often got too high, and she had panic attacks. By the time Paul married Helen and moved out, his niece had already been studying at college and was quite grown up. She liked to go out with friends, go on trips, date guys, and didn't deny herself anything, and spent almost no time at home. So Mrs. Clark often turned with all her questions and problems to her son's family, or, more correctly, to Helen, because there was nothing helpful from the others. However, Mrs. Clark did not forget to help her granddaughter. She usually paid all her bills, as Charlotte was left without her mother, and she had never seen her father. So they lived, and everything was normal, until Mrs. Clark had to go to the hospital. The consequences of a strong spike in blood pressure were serious. At the hospital, she was more or less cured for 3 weeks, but the woman was still a bedridden patient who required specialized care. Paul, as usual, rescued himself, leaving his wife to deal with these problems. "Women are better at these questions," he said simply. "Which questions?" wondered Helen. "Well, nursing. You know, taking care of people. Rehabilitation," said Paul thoughtfully and scratched the back of his head. "I'm a designer, not a nurse, and I don't know more about it than you do," Helen sighed. "But okay, I'll talk to the doctor." Helen disliked her mother-in-law, but there was a kind of diplomatic truce between them. At first, they used to quarrel a lot, but then they both decided not to escalate their disagreement, especially since they were living far away and saw each other only on family holidays. Both Helen and Mrs. Clark disagreed with one another on many things, but they did not say them out loud. Helen tolerated her mother-in-law out of politeness and respect. The mother-in-law put up with Helen because she was a good wife to Paul. In addition, Mrs. Clark understood that her son was not a perfect breadwinner, and all the income was coming from her daughter-in-law. Mrs. Clark rarely saw her grandson. Sometimes her blood pressure was high, or she had headaches that were so bad that she had no time for anything. And all these exacerbations usually occurred when Helen asked her mother-in-law to sit with the baby for at least a couple of hours. After a while, Helen stopped hoping for help from her mother-in-law. But now there was a time when everyone was counting on Helen's help. She was the one who had taken Mrs. Clark out of the hospital because Paul had not been released from work. and Helen was working from home, and she could leave at any time. It was decided that Paul and his family would stay at his mother's apartment for a while to help her for the first time. Helen lost 2 sizes of weight in 3 weeks. She managed somehow to do her job and take care of her mother-in-law. She boiled broths, pureed fruits and vegetables, and fed Mrs. Clark from a spoon, washed her every day. Favourite granddaughter Charlotte usually sneaked into her room quietly and did not come out until night, sitting like a mouse, just so she would not be asked to help. She would go to her studies in the morning and go out in the evening. Life does not stand still. The grandmother has her own problems, and she has nothing to do with it. Helen's husband did not help much either, citing fatigue after work. Helen tried to appeal to his conscience. "It's your mother. Help me, because it's hard for me alone." I can't. It's a woman's duty," Paul mumbled as always. "I went to the store. I bought groceries. What else do you need?" Meanwhile, women's duty was very serious. Mrs. Clark was not on the mend. She was grumbling, angry with Helen, her son and everyone else. She was cranky and often said things that, in Helen's opinion, she would not have said before her illness. Thus, Helen heard many things about herself. It turned out that she was incredibly lucky to get a good education and find such a good job. After all, according to her mother-in-law, Helen did nothing but drink tea at the computer and sometimes click on it. And Paul is a good boy who was just unlucky. His studies didn't go well at first. The teachers were wrong. Then he didn't get into college. He was just unlucky once again. Mrs. Clark had to take out a loan for his son's education, but Paul still studied poorly, skipped classes and almost dropped out of college several times. Mrs. Clark had spent a lot of nerves before he graduated from college. And then there was her eldest daughter, who had been sick for a long time, and Mrs. Clark was literally torn trying to survive and pull her children through. Thank God, Charlotte got a scholarship to college, and Mrs. Clark was immensely proud of this because, in her opinion, it proved the important role of good and bad teachers. Helen listened to all this for the 100th time and realized that she couldn't go on like this. Everyone was good. Everyone, except for her, because she was just lucky. Yes, I am lucky, especially with my husband, Helen thought sadly. What have I found in him? Where were my eyes and my brain? She thought about it more and more often. One day, she suggested that Paul hire a nurse for his mother and move back into their home. A nurse? Her husband wondered. Well, it's expensive. Actually, I can't afford it. But it's up to you. If you need help, hire somebody. But pay yourself. She and Paul had had an arrangement for a long time. He paid the utility bills and bought basic groceries. Helen did the rest. This was the last straw for Helen. Do I have to do everything? No. You've become too bold. I want to live in a family where everyone cares about each other, not me alone about everyone. I've become like my own shadow, and no one cares. The next day, she told her mother-in-law she was going to the store, but instead she just went back to her apartment with her son. How pleasant, thought Helen, lying on her huge double bed and looking up at the ceiling. I'm home. I don't want anything. I'm so tired. She called her son to dinner. They were eating, and Helen thought about the fact that they must have missed her there at her mother-in-law's house by now. She did not leave the elderly woman at the mercy of fate. Before she left, she had fed her, changed her clothes, and in about an hour and a half, Paul was due back from work. Helen wrote him a note, saying that she did not want to and could not live like this, and so she had left. She wished Mrs. Clark a speedy recovery and asked him to tell her not to be offended by her. Paul rushed over the same evening. There was almost nothing to talk about. Her husband did not care about Helen and why she had left. He did not talk about his love for her or his son. He only worried about what he would do without her. "I suggest you hire a nurse at first. Professional care, it's better," Helen mouthed thoughtfully. "And yes, I'm filing for divorce. I don't want to be the dray horse that everybody rides." Bye. Paul left with nothing. Mrs. Clark also called and asked Helen to come back and not to leave her and Paul. She apologized for her words for being so ungrateful to her, but there was an arrogant tone in her voice, which sounded like, "Hurry up to forgive us and go back to your duties." Helen explained that she did not owe anyone anything, and Mrs. Clark has a son and a fairly mature granddaughter. They should take an active part in her life because they owe her a lot. Hearing this, Mrs. Clark hung up. The divorce took place soon after. That is how Helen unexpectedly became an unmarried woman, and as it turned out, it was all right. She had less to worry about now, and she was grateful for the occasion, which helped her open her eyes to the attitudes of her once close people. As time passed, Mrs. Clark recovered, a good nurse who not only competently cared for the woman, but also engaged in special rehabilitation exercises with her, played a major role in this. When need forced it, Paul found a part-time job and was able to pay for her services. Wow, you see, it turns out that it was possible. Helen grinned sadly upon hearing the news from Charlotte, whom she met by chance. Charlotte also said that before they hired a nurse, she and Paul took care of her grandmother. Great. It's good for everyone that I got them all off my back. It's good for me too. I'll be smarter from now on, Helen thought, doing another task at the computer.